started. Got it. Okay, we are started. So that's a little weird. Okay, well, hey everyone. I'm Helene from Triangle Vegfest, Virtual Vegfest Live, and we have Dr. T. Colin Campbell with us today. So thanks for joining us, and want to make sure that I have an echo of me. I need to see.
Don't do that. It's delayed.
Okay, there we go. That makes it better. I had like it streaming on another app on another browser, so I could hear me talking, and it was a little disconcerting. Okay, so first, if you'd like to win prizes, go to virtualvegfestlive.com and hit the contest tab, and you can win prizes from our sponsors, which is Terraseed, Hodo Foods, Veg-curious, Cinnaholic, Fabulous, Bernie Wild's Adventure Sauce, Kathy Hester, Trippo Treats, BV Kids, and Total Body Lab. And thanks to Total Body Lab for sponsoring our live talks for the month of January, which is almost over. Hey, Dr. Campbell. We did it. We're here. And we know you can share your screen, which makes me very happy. And then I'm going to let you start because, let's do it.
Are you speaking to me?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, first share screen again. Okay, well, hello, everybody. Really delighted to speak with you. I have been in this business of nutritional science, if you will, for a long, long time. I'm going on my 66th year, to be honest about it, starting with my graduate research, which was on the same topic, incidentally, of course. So I've been at it the whole time. And I've learned a lot of things, met lots of people, but along the way, I have become, in the more recent times, in the last maybe 10, 20 years, or more than that, I guess, troubled by the fact that so many people want to talk about this idea to some extent, or talk about some idea to do with nutrition, and everybody seems to have something different. And that troubles me because that causes a lot of confusion. I want to go back to the basics and argue that among all these different things, there's one foundation for it, namely for the idea of what to eat. Let me see her side. So there's one fundamental idea that we need to keep in mind, and that is it's the science. Science is very impersonal. Really, it's supposed to be factual. But let me show you something here. What I'm talking about. First off, we have all kinds of diets we obviously know about, both within the plant-based community and without. There's Mediterranean, Atkins, different versions of Atkins, by the way, low carb, paleo, low cal, ketogenic, all those things. They kept changing the name. It was the same idea, but they kept changing the name over the years, I think, just to give themselves the appearance of having something new. The DASH diet, that's more known in science, I guess. Pritikin, gluten-free. Well, there you can see it. Vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, all those things. So we got all these different diets, each of them trying to claim their own fame and tell you what they're all about. And that really, just on the basics, leads to confusion. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about nutrition research itself, my community. This is a professional nutrition community, really focused on basic science. And we add our confusion to it too, just for the general idea of nutrition, what it is. We talk about individual nutrient types, study them. I taught this for years and years at Cornell and elsewhere. We talk about different nutrition types, We talk about specific nutrient recommendations for each nutrient. We talk about individual nutrient targets, and we talk about individual nutrient supplements. If that isn't confusion, I don't know what is. That's an enormous amount of information that we got to kind of sort out in our heads. Then, of course, we have the medical community itself, the clinical community. I have trouble with the clinical community. I've spoken to medical schools in all but 6 states in the United States and many countries around the world. I know what medical institutions are, and I have to tell you that throughout, nutrition is not taught. It's that simple. The medical community seems not to know what nutrition is. The doctors don't really know the essence of nutrition. They, in turn, talk about individual diseases. They tend to divide them up. There's 16 different kinds of heart diseases now, for example. And they talk about, most importantly, about targeted drug treatments. So just look at this page here just for a second. That is an enormous opportunity for all kinds of confusion. No one person, no one organization can basically be singing the same song, it seems like to me. It's all now go to the question concerning nutrition. But before getting into the data on this point, I want to also bring in another thought that has really arisen in the last 2 or 3 decades. It really has to do with environmental problems of all kinds, human health problems, obviously, use of drugs, whether to do it, not to do, that kind of thing. And here they are. And you can see that when we group environmental issues, like I'm doing here, I've got 6. I've got climate warming, deep water loss, forest loss, for deforestation, if you will, top there. You can see it here. Anyway, and then I also gathered up about what have I got? 6 different topics here in human health that we concern ourselves with. Healthcare costs, a big deal. That's a really big one. We rely on drugs. We can become dependent on drugs, but drugs have side effects. We're getting now a lower life expectancy, believe it or not. And so here's a whole bunch of data, and I could add another sort of probably 8 to 10 topics, each of which command their own attention. And so what all this does is then make us think that each one of these topics is kind of like its own. It has its own identity. Each one has its own causes. Oh, for God's sake, this is not possible to wrestle with this kind of complexity based on what I just told you before, the different kind of diets. So I'm going to suggest this. Instead of one cause for each problem and trying to study it to death to figure out what's going on, I'm going to say there's one broad spectrum cause. It's very simple. It's the food we eat. So then the question becomes, what kind of food? If this large systemic problem is due to the food eating, I'm going to write down, let's look at a series of questions here. So what kind of food? I mean, that's pretty obvious. And then that in turn, I'm going to suggest depends on the effect of the food on our bodies. We're obviously not wanting to consume food that's not doing us good, but we want to have food that obviously is keeping us healthy. That's an obvious question. That leads me to the concept of nutrition. And the word nutrition is not used very well. It itself is kind of confusing. People talk about diet and they talk about nutrition and they talk about food and this and that. Nutrition has its own identity that even people in my own field and certainly the medical field really kind of confuse it. Nutrition is a concept. It is a concept in a way. It's a structured kind of thinking. It's the biological expression of food. So we eat food, okay? When the food is consumed, then it's basically, we swallow it, it becomes digested, it's absorbed into the bloodstream, it goes to different cells and so forth and so on. That whole process of how food operates in our body, better yet, how does nutrition coming from the food operate in the body? That's why I want to draw your attention to that. Now, I can put this slide here at the end of my talk or at the beginning. I decided to put it up front because in the experience I've had over these decades and decades, it seems like to me, I've come up with, strictly on the basis of the science, I have to tell you, come up with 2 recommendations I rather like. Basically, these 2 recommendations comprehend, I'm going to argue, the complexity We don't need to get caught up in the complexity, but basically, at the same time, these recommendations I consider to be pretty simple. And that's what we need to drive for if we're going to cause change in the world. We got to keep this message simple. We've got to basically understand in general what the world food is doing and have some common thought about this. So two things, keep in mind. Consume plants. And I'll tell you why in a moment. Most of the rest of the lecture, in fact, will deal with that question. Consume plants, not animals. First. Secondly, just consume plants in the whole food form as much as possible. And what I'm really referring to here is that the body looks at the food and Mother Nature has a look at all the things there and she decides what to do with it. And the best way for her to have her opportunity to do the right thing is if we more or less consume the various plant foods more or less together as a meal. We can obviously spread it out. We can cook it. We can chop it. We can do all kinds of things like that. All we need to do is just eat plants and kind of keep them varied too. The various parts of the plant, from the tubers to the leaves to the blossoms, if you will, the fruits and so forth. So there's two ideas. Let's stay with that. Consume plants, eat whole food. And I'm going to argue that is the most powerful, consistent, and comprehensive message I can think of. If we're going to cause change in the world, we're going to cause change in the world to affect environment and healthcare costs and all things. Just keep the message simple. There's not any fancy words in it. Just keep it simple. Eat plants, consume in whole food form. It really works, as many of you already know. Now, I also want to say this too. Here's a trade-off in what we eat. That basically, when we study people and what they're eating and stuff, we tend to forget this. Basically, we can eat a certain amount of calories in a day, if you will, or a meal, whatever. And as we increase animal food, we decrease plant food. Excuse me, that's just the way it is. So when we talk about, correlations of certain things about animal food as to what it has to do with diseases and so forth, we have to keep in mind, in human studies especially, keep in mind that as animal food consumption goes up, plant food consumption goes down. So we get two contributions to health. Animal food, I'm going to argue, is not so good. Plant food is where the really good stuff is. So when we're eating food, we have to keep in mind we're doing essentially two things, even if we all eat only one and not the other. Okay? So now let's get into some of the nitty-gritty. And I have been in this field, as I say, for a long time, and my focus for many of my early years was in nutrition and with respect to protein. How much protein do we need? And along the way, I've come up with this idea here, I believe is pretty sound. No nutrient has impacted dietary choice over time more than animal-based protein. In fact, I call it the driver nutrient. Can't think of another single nutrient that has had the impact on what we choose to eat, whatever stage of civilization we happen to be in, and wherever we happen to live. That idea of getting animal protein is the driving choice. In fact, if anyone questions that, and that's a whole lecture in itself, I can tell you that when you get around to trying to question whether we should eat animal protein, that's trouble. It's actually destroyed professional careers. It's been going on for a long time. And of course, today, here we have it. I'm going to suggest, of course, we're going to show you that, and probably you hardly agree, we don't need the animal protein. We can get all the protein we need from plants. But nonetheless, the conversation that's going on in the world today mostly is how do we meet the demand for more animal food? I mean, look at these pictures here. In poor countries, I've worked in a lot of the less developed countries, and they just can't wait to get around to get enough money to be able to buy the animal food. They think that's what it's all about. And so here's a chart here showing you the relationship between animal protein consumption on the x-axis as a percent of total calories versus the amount of income we had. That line could hardly be straighter. It's very impressive. This is put up by the World Bank, and it shows just a collection of countries. Here we are near the top, the United States. What we see here, animal protein consumption goes up when we get the money to buy it. It's that simple. It's that simple. I've seen this in spades in poor countries, and that's really what they want to eat the kind of protein we get in the United States because they figure we're advanced, so to speak, because we're eating animal protein. I mean, that's the kind of thought process that's going on. But just keep that in mind. The amount of animal protein consumed in different countries is when people have the money to buy it. So it's an economic question in many ways. So there it is, have money, eat high quality animal protein. Okay, a little bit of my background is I have to say this, and don't want to talk about myself all the time, but I do have to in this case because I ended up with these ideas are coming from the opposite point of view. That's me there on the front of a combine, my brother and I, that's the brother right here. We each had our own combines. The third brother, the third one of us had a combine himself. My dad, there he's there. We basically had to combine, and that's where we got our money for me to go to school, to college. Finally, I lived on a dairy farm, and of course, I never thought about this, but I assumed that meat, milk, and eggs was the menu of the day, if you will. That's what we did. Everybody else did it. Finally, we sold the cows in 1956. 3 months later is when I went to graduate school. So I was swamped in the idea of animal protein without even knowing the word, to be honest about it. When I went to graduate school, I did a doctoral dissertation at Cornell on a rather technical topic here, basically advancing the consumption of more animal protein consumption. That was my background, okay. And I was doing it in a way of working with sheep and cows, giving them an inorganic form of nitrogen, that the argument went that they could use that and convert it into organic nitrogen and then make protein. So after graduate school and soaked in protein, animal protein throughout up until that point, I then was on to a university at Virginia Tech, as a matter of fact, in Blacksburg. Spent 10 years there. And while I was at the Department of Biochemistry, I was given a responsibility of coordinating a nationwide program of feeding malnourished children in the Philippines. This is funded by the U.S. State Department. And malnourished children is a problem around the world, in poor countries, of course. And so I went there, and that was together with my senior colleague at the time. We went to the Philippines to figure out a model, if we could, on how best to address this problem. While I was there, I learned through my medical colleagues, actually, that they were inquiring what I was doing here. These are medical doctors, very high up in the country, want to know what I was doing. And I told them about, we work with malnourished children, et cetera, et cetera. And they pointed out to me, two surgeons, that they were operating on children aged 4 and younger for liver cancer, of all things. So I went back and looked what data we had. We didn't have much there, but I got the impression that the children consuming the most protein, which was our intent, get children more protein, if you will. But if the children consuming the most protein, it seemed to me, had a higher risk for liver cancer. Then I saw this study in India. Basically, this is a rat study, experimental animal study, where they basically thought that if these animals, the rats in this case, were programmed to get liver cancer, they thought if they fed 2 different levels of protein, the high levels of protein would keep the cancer under control. The low levels would be good. Low levels would be bad. So here's what the results they got. The animals consuming the most protein, 20% of total calories, 100% got the liver cancer. The animals feeding 5%, none did. That's pretty striking. So all of a sudden, my thoughts about these children in this study here really got me wondering. I mean, high protein causing more cancer? That's a bit weird. Increasing protein, increasing cancer. Not a problem here. Came back home, organized a study that continued on that particular line of funding for the next 27 years, funding from the National Institutes of Health. And so let me show you one slide here that kind of represents much of what we learned. Basically, if we follow cancer development for the first 12 weeks after the cancer is initiated, and by initiation, I'm talking about causing a mutation. So you can use something that cause a mutation. So in a sense, the starting point for the cancer was already underway. And then we fed 20% protein, just like the Indian workers did. The cancers were growing well the first 12 weeks. Fed 5%, they didn't grow at all. I mean, look at that big difference. It's the same thing. Really remarkable. No doubt about this that the Indian workers had done, quite frankly. Then it did something else that really just then, it got me off my butt, and it just basically said, you got to face up to this. I really wanted to know what would happen if we changed protein intake. 20% caused the cancer to grow. Look at here, it's on that dotted line right there. Then we switched it after 3 weeks to 5% protein, turned it off, turned it on, turned it off. This was truly remarkable because there are a couple of ideas here. First off, we could turn cancer development on and off by nutrition. In this case, just regulating protein intake. I mean, that was striking. It also raised a much larger question that still people in the cancer research community, of which I've been a part myself, they still don't want to hear about nutrition and what it can do. They want to think that genes cause cancer. Cancer is a genetic disease. That's the first sentence the National Cancer Institute has on their website. Cancer is a genetic disease. We learned long ago, it brought into a serious question. I do not believe that's true. It's nutrition, not the genes, that control cancer development. And I could go on for another hour or two, sort of elaborating on that point. But basically, the protein we were using was casein, the main protein of cow's milk. You can imagine what that meant to me coming from a dairy farm, okay? So casein is considered to be high quality protein, one of the best. Egg protein is another one. And so this animal protein is what turned the cancer on. So we eventually got around to trying some plant proteins. This was published in 1989, as you can see here. One of my graduate students did that. I was an undergraduate at the time. In any case, we tried soy protein, wheat protein. It did not increase the cancer, even when it was raised to the level of 20%. I can't imagine data being more striking than this in this way. Animal protein turns on cancer. If I can use this word, animal protein is the most most potent chemical carcinogen ever before seen. Plant proteins turned it off, did not do that. So with those kind of results, coming along over the years, I became really interested in what effect does animal protein have, not just on cancer, but other diseases. Can it play a role maybe in heart disease and diabetes and so forth and so on? And does plant protein prevent? I thought that was a reasonable question. So let me that just leave the question for the moment. Now I want to go to another question that we tend to want to do in research. At this time, by the way, I was in two science professions. One was nutrition, the other was in pharmacology. I spent the first 10, 15 years of my career actually focused on pharmacology. And so with that kind of thinking, pharmacology, you want to know which drug does what, this kind of stuff. You want to know especially what's the mechanism for an effect. Here we're looking at a very surprising effect, protein causing cancer. So the question obviously is, what is the mechanism for that? And by the way, we like to know what the mechanism is, the biochemical mechanism, because if we can identify the responsible mechanism for such a dramatic effect like this, then maybe we can develop a drug. We can take the drug so we can keep on doing what we're doing. That's exactly what was happened with statins that you may know about. With heart disease is also a very complex situation like this. They found a mechanism, they found a drug, they called a statin, and then they used the statin to try to prevent heart disease. It doesn't really work. It's just kind of silly. So I'm going to show you here as we look for the mechanism responsible for this protein effect. And what I'm showing here is just a scheme that we use in cancer research. All of us did that, showing sort of the linkage over time of what happens to cancer. Cancer started out being initiated. That's the first stage. That's when the mutation forms, the genes are being altered, and then the cancer starts dividing. If the mutation occurs and it gets fixed in place, then the cells are going to divide. Now they're going to be dividing as cancer cells. And over time, the cancer cells now are dividing. We call that promotion. And finally, it reaches the stage in the case of humans, hey, we got a problem. So that's when we discover oftentimes that the cancer is spread to other tissues, it's metastasized, That's called progression. So we more or less had 3 stages of cancer development. And I wanted to learn where's this mechanism kind of thing. So we looked into the first stage. And this took, as I say, this usually would involve a whole PhD thesis. So each one of these mechanisms took 3 or 4 years. I'm looking for the mechanism, the responsible mechanism that causes high protein to cause more cancer. I mean, and so we first off learned that higher protein increases the rate of the entry of the carcinogen into the cell. That causes a mutation. That sounds interesting. Maybe that's it. If we could just get something block the entry into the cell, that might work. But then when the carcinogen gets in the cell, the high protein diet increases an enzyme that metabolizes the carcinogen in one of 2 ways. Basically, this enzyme, this mixed function enzyme, oxidase enzyme, it metabolizes it in a way that body gets rid of the carcinogen. That's the big deal. But then a little bit of it kind of sneaks through and creates a more active product that binds to DNA. DNA being the gene, part of the gene, of course. That's the mutation. So we started looking for mechanisms. And I can't go into all these details. Each one of them is worth 1 or 2 lectures, I must tell you. So I'm just trying to summarize as simply as I can. But we basically looked for what turned out to be 5 different mechanisms. And by the way, the high protein diet decreased the one good mechanism we have. Instead of increased it, we decreased it. That's repairing DNA. Okay, now let's go to the second stage. The first one up here is initiation. The second is promotion. That's when the cells are divided. I kept on looking for that mechanism. I couldn't seem like a find one, count much. And so here's some more down here. Here's the summary. The high protein diet increases 8 cancer promotion mechanisms. In other words, as the high protein diet changes the activity of these mechanisms, it basically increases these mechanisms. And in all those cases, an increase is bad news because that's what turns on cancer. So we got 8 mechanisms just turned on cancer. Then we found 2 mechanisms that are good. Like DNA repair and forming part of the immune system to inhibit the cancer. We looked at that. And we found that in those 2 cases, the high protein diet actually decreased the 2 mechanisms that should have been increased. So we had 10 mechanisms. 8 increasing cancer because they're increased, 2 increasing cancer, but because it decreased the protective mechanisms. So all 10 worked in unison together to increase cancer. This turned out to be probably the single most important thing I think that was involved in my career because it suggests a very different discussion involved in the causes of disease, especially like cancer, but applies to other diseases as well. They all work together. At least this concept that when we consume food, it's digested and all the nutrients are out there and hundreds, thousands, if you will, nutrient-like substances. Something's involved in directing that traffic and coordinating in a way in which it causes disease or health, as the case may be. In any case, and long and short of this here point, though, is that I'm looking for the mechanism. Finally, I decided there's no such thing as a mechanism. That is fundamental to the entire drug industry. They want to find a mechanism so they can get a chemical, try to block it. I'm saying here for nutrition, in this case, there's no mechanism. No one key mechanism. Doesn't lend itself for the use of drugs. Nutrition handles the whole thing all one fell swoop. Now I'm going to put a little scheme on here. I just a little picture that some of you may like. I don't know, but this is really a summary of the cancer development process. We have normal cells. Okay, that's when the cancer is being initiated. The carcinogen is going into the cell, and I put a little star there by each one of these mechanisms. Carcinogen comes into the cell at that point in time. This enzyme, remember that enzyme? It detoxifies it or activates it, whatever. The enzyme was changed in 2 different ways. Both cases, the high protein diet changed it, that activity. And finally, the bad stuff, the little bit kind of leaks out, binds to the DNA. So that's the carcinogen DNA. Now we got a damaged gene that's now set up to cause a mutation. So if that cell divides before it repairs that DNA, that's the other thing. We have in our cells that are 35 trillion cells, I should say. we got a mechanism there to automatically repair this DNA damage that goes on all the time. And the high protein diet decreased this. I mean, my gosh, that's terrible, if you will. Now we got a cancer cell. Normal cell, probably not more than 1/10 of 1% of normal cells actually make it through to this stage to form a new cell here. So our bodies work very well keeping our cells healthy as much as possible. If we eat the right food, we eat the wrong food, now the cancer is converting into the normal cancer cell. And there's a bunch of mechanisms there. And I didn't tell you about those before, but they are part of those 10. Every time we looked for a mechanism, we found, as I said already, not too many times. So eventually the early cancer cell becomes diagnosable as a tumor. People get diagnosed with that and are told they've got the problem. But there, along the way, like DNA repair, the high protein diet blocked that, and also blocked the formation of these so-called immune cells. We called them natural killer cells, not just me, our colleagues and I did. About 30 years ago, this was discovered. These now are basically known as T cells that actually play a role in the coronavirus, for example. So the high protein diet blocked the formation of this good cell that they're there to kill the cells. If they come through and they're now a little cancer cell, the immune cells kill them off with these kind of cells. So we got two places where you see the blockage here. There's a high protein diet blocking this, blocking this. Those two things should be left alone. They should be enhanced. So a high protein diet blocks the formation of natural killer cells, and it blocks the repair of that mutation, that likely mutation. Now let's go to the next stage. Enough for the science and out of the laboratory. I want now to ask some questions that I got really quite excited about over the years, especially as I spent some time at the University of Oxford when I was on sabbatic. And so it's when I got caught up in this in the middle 80s it was, finding out, where do we get this worship of protein from? And why did we just focus on just animal protein? That all started in 1839. This gentleman here, Gerhard Mulder, chemist, he was doing some work on dogs, and the dogs were surviving because they were eating meat. So he thought, at least. And so he wanted to discover what's in that meat, what kind of chemicals in that meat. I mean, mind you, this is the very early days of chemistry, so not much known in those days. So pretty remarkable research. But he wanted to look into the meat and see what he could find. And he found something that was needed for the dogs to survive, okay? And finally crystallized it. He got it in a test tube, if you will. And you need to give it a word. He used the Greek word proteos, which means prime importance. And so that is the basis for the name protein. Protein comes from the Greek word proteos. All starting with the fact that Gerhard Mulder and a couple of his colleagues thought they had discovered life itself. And so they gave this name, protein, and that's how the myth started, to be honest about it, on the extraordinary value of protein to promote life, because it started right there. And that's a very interesting story itself. It has a long history. Why did he even think that this chemical in meat was supposed to be prime important? But he did. So there you go. Why? Now I want to just turn your attention to what I've already inferred here. Namely, we have high proteins, and I mean high quality protein, low quality, okay? High quality protein is for animal protein. Low quality protein is for plant protein. So the story goes. Started back in the 1800s, quite frankly. And then in 1924, a professor at the University of Illinois came along and sort of justified that belief in high protein and came up with a little equation. It was a really simple-minded, really simple equation. He happened to believe that protein in animals was far better than protein in plants. And it turned out that the word quality really comes from the fact that when animal proteins are fed, more of that protein is retained in the body to create faster growth rate, which is good for profit for animal production, obviously. People tend to think that's a good idea for the kids too, so go as fast as we can, eat more animal protein. Plant protein, all the plant proteins, no exceptions, there's no overlap. Animal proteins, a higher proportion of the protein is retained by the body, okay? Plant proteins are lower. So that's where the concept high quality protein, low quality, it's a nonsense word. We should never have invented that word. High quality protein, animal protein is not high quality, everybody believes. And so there's another word we went along with high quality too. A higher proportion of consumed protein retained biological value. Okay. By the way, this really comes into my own doctoral dissertation when I was at Cornell, when I was very much aware of the conversation arising at that time. So high protein, I mean, animal producers are all, they more retain, higher quality, plant producers, lower retention. Lower, see, that we spend a lot of time talking about that. Why is that high quality? Just because it grows things faster? Well, now we've discovered in the last 10, 20 years, certainly much as my own research program, we discovered that proteins, the animal proteins, more retained. Here's what it does. It does quite a lot of things that we know. But medical scientists, especially, of course, they don't even teach nutrition, but the researchers in this area, they want to take note of this. So this is kind of under the radar at the present time. The high protein diet, the high animal protein diet increases the rate of formation of growth hormone. What's that? Well, if we have more growth hormone, it stimulates cancer growth. It does some other things. It's not very good. It increases the amount of estrogen, the female hormone in the blood. That's not so good. That's associated with breast cancer. High animal protein increase, a higher proportion is retained, increase the formation of these nasty so-called free radicals, oxygen free radicals, that cause mutations, on and on. Decrease a couple I've mentioned before. So there's a bunch of mechanisms. There's only a couple, just a few. More retained means more of these mechanisms that are being increased. That increases cancer, all of them together. Then we come down here. Here's something that everybody's forgotten. This was discovered over 100 years ago first. Namely, consuming more animal protein increases serum cholesterol, especially LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol. Increases that in turn supposedly is related to more heart disease. So high animal protein, consuming a lot of animal protein, we increase the rate of heart disease. Same for sugar. High animal protein increases blood sugar. And it increases other things, A1C, that's typically seen to go up in type 2 diabetics. So high animal protein, more retained. Look, we already know the mechanism, all of these mechanisms. Here what it does, it increases cancer, increases heart disease. That's quite a formula. That's just incidentally not really being talked about in the community at the present time. And I'll tell you the reason for that in a moment. They don't want to hear it. So let me show you some other data here that really just completed my complete change of heart, my change of mind on this question concerning protein. These are charts that I gathered maybe 10 years ago or so from researchers in years past that show the relationship between animal protein consumption on the x-axis with some kind of disease, okay? This is kidney cancer, and they're compared different countries. So this was published maybe 25, 30 years ago by another group, and just screenshot. I'm just simply showing here exactly what was in that paper. As countries, these are all different countries. As animal protein consumption goes up, kidney cancer goes up too. In fact, it's very dramatic. That relationship has been proven in a variety of studies. So here we have this straight line relationship again. What it's basically saying is if you want to have the lowest risk for renal cancer, don't consume any animal protein at all. Same thing here. Here's a study published in 1959 by a gentleman I happen to have known when I was in graduate school. He was basically showing a relationship between heart disease with animal protein consumption. He actually put animal protein on there. Increase in animal protein increases heart disease. These are all different countries. Got the same straight line. I went back and he didn't do that straight line, and neither did the other. But I actually drew a line of best fit, as we say in statistics, the line of best fit to these data. And you can see, there it is. Straight line, straight line. And both of these lines come right back, pointing that back to zero, just about. In other words, saying that theoretically, any amount of animal protein consumed is going to start raising your risk for kidney cancer and heart disease. Here's one for prostate cancer. This is done in more recent times, 1980. Gosh, that's 40 years ago still, but recent for me. But in any case, here's a relationship between prostate cancer risk, in other words, a bunch of different countries again, prostate cancer and non-fat milk. Look at this. Non-fat milk. Now, I'm sure you know it has no fat in it, okay? You can't be fat in the milk. It has a tiny bit of sugar, but it's immaterial. What non-fat milk is nothing more than a protein drink. It's a drink of animal protein. Look at that. More animal protein, more prostate cancer. That's pretty remarkable. It really is. Here's one for breast cancer. This is a friend of mine from Canada many years ago. He was looking at the relationship between diet and breast cancer for different countries. And he found that saturated fat had a nice relationship just like that. But it turns out saturated fat is nothing more than a surrogate for animal protein. Saturated fat tends to be more in animal foods. It has a 95% correlation with animal foods. So this is really animal protein. And I drew that line on there, and I actually presented at a meeting that he was in. And I asked his permission beforehand. I said, hey, do you mind if I reinterpret your data and call it animal proteins? Not at all. He was totally in favor of it. So I'm not adjusting his data. He said that was just exactly right. Look at that. Animal protein intake, let's call it animal protein. Animal protein increases more breast cancer for different countries. Here's the US way up here. And we know a lot about why this is so. It has to do with estrogen, sexual hormone binding globulin, all kinds of things. So there's a really good, solid relationship. Here's one more. Heart disease again, but in this case, rather than animal protein, it's cholesterol. As cholesterol consumption goes up, then the rate of cancer goes up. Again, same thing, right? Well, there has been a presumption for many years, and still is true, unfortunately, in the vegetarian, vegan communities, that we shouldn't consume cholesterol because it might cause heart disease. That's false. The cholesterol we consume is not the specific cause of heart disease. It's not the cause of the increasing levels of cholesterol in blood. It's animal protein that was discovered over 100 years ago. And unfortunately, it's kind of stayed with us because no one wants to question animal protein. So look at that relationship. Again, animal protein, as we increase more, we get more heart disease. Here's colon cancer. As meat intake goes up, and of course, meat, you know that's an index of protein too, animal protein. There's the same thing again. Here's one for uterine cancer. In this case, they related to total fat. They didn't think about protein. Most of them didn't think about animal protein itself, but this is actually an animal protein-based diet too. Because if you look at the amount of fat consumed in different countries, it's pretty much a reflection of the consumption of animal food. They just go right together. So you see this here for in this case here is uterine cancer. So there's a variety of cancers. One of them is heart disease, all sort of showing the same thing. I say the same, well, it's saying the same thing. I'm talking about animal protein and or its surrogates, like cholesterol, meat, total fat. I mean, these are all really animal protein surrogates. So with this kind of data, 7 charts here, and I know there's another 6 or 7 I haven't yet found, but in any case, across the board, increasing animal protein consumption, or better yet, say increasing animal food to get that animal protein because it's so precious. We see the same thing, just going across the whole gamut. And I must tell you this too. If one wonders whether or not this is good science or whether it'll be somebody else will come and show something, they never will. There's no way under the sun that somebody is ever going to come along and show that as animal protein consumption goes up, disease will go down. That's impossible. With this body of data, you can settle on the fact this is about as good a data as you'll ever see in the relationship between animal protein containing foods, animal food, and all these different diseases. And put that together with the data I showed you before in our own laboratory that involves all these mechanisms, it's a slam dunk. There's no argument. No more argument about animal protein doing anything good. It doesn't. It's just that simple. Here's one, by the way, for plant protein. As you can see, there's no relationship. So plant protein, it doesn't have that line. It's just animal protein does. Now, that idea, I'm going to show you something here. It's really very disturbing. This happened just as you can see about 20 years ago, and involved a person I know extremely well. In fact, she was the chairman of our department. I used to kind of get into it some, but basically he had a very powerful position at the National Academy of Science for a while. And they, in that deliberation, this was the Dietary Guidelines Committee started doing their work at the time. And with a new report that came out, should have been 2000, but it came out 2 years late. They decided at that time, instead of just only talking about the amount of nutrients that needed to be consumed, the recommended dietary allowance, they decided to put an upper limit on them. So they had an upper safe limit they came along with, and they came up with these recommendations. And it turned out that, read this here, first line of the news, this is a news release. This was not the report itself. It was a news release. It says, to meet the body's daily energy and nutritional needs while minimizing risk for chronic disease, we should get 45 to 65% of calories from carbohydrate, from carbohydrate, 20 to 35 from fat. And this is the big one, 10% protein. Let me translate that for you. I know I'm going too fast in this here. But what this says from the most important, number one policy body in the country, probably in the world, they're saying that we can go up to 35% protein safely, no problem. Okay? I just showed you data that going from 10 to 20% is a serious problem with all those human data, as well as for the experimental animal data. So all of a sudden here, this august body in 2002 came along with this very prominent, very powerful statement for all of us people in the public to learn. We can consume protein all the way up to 35%, no problem. It's safe. That is total nonsense. That report came out, now it's become the domain of all the dietitian organizations and so forth, unfortunately. It's had an enormous influence. So what this august body chose to do in 2002 is say, don't worry about it. We can have all the protein we need. And by the way, all of it can come from animal protein. We don't need any. We can't even hardly get that high if we had a pure diet only of animal protein. That's how strange this phenomenon is. So now I want to just turn your attention a little bit more to some policy issues concerning this. This little chart here shows a breakdown of protein consumption levels in the diet. 5 to 6% of calories, 9 to 10%, and so forth. This is the level of dietary protein in this range in reference to the percent of total diet calories. This is American data. What I'm going to show you here, take it one by one. We have known since 1943 with this particular body, they adjust every 5 years, we've known that 5 to 6% protein is all we need. Okay. Now, some assumptions, that's the minimum requirement. We do need protein, obviously, it's a very important nutrient, but that's the absolute minimum right there. That was determined and reassessed many times over up to 2000. Anyhow, this is a minimum here. The recommended dietary allowance that many of you may know about, that represents looking at the data for the minimum intake and adjusting it upwards by 2 standard deviations, and we get a recommended dietary allowance. What that says in reality is that if we are consuming 9 to 10% protein, that's all we need. We're in good shape. That's all we need. And get the best health right here around 9 to 10%. Okay, but what did we do? What did we do? As a society, here's this black range. This is the range of intake that we do. We're consuming somewhere between 11 and 22%, 23%. We're over the mark, above what we should be doing. This is the intake range. And of the protein that we're shooting over the mark, it turns out for the average American, 75 to 80% of the total protein we're consuming is from animal food. So these numbers, as they unfolded over the years, really encourage the consumption of more protein, especially in the animal protein form. Okay, now what I pasted over this are those slides. Remember the slides I showed you? Look in the upper left-hand corner, just as a collection of those relationships. those numbers, those graphs, if you will, really, if we superimpose it over this, they start at about around here and they go up. So here we are, as we increase our protein intake, okay, we are increasing our rates of all these diseases. That's why we have the highest rates in the world. That's why we die sooner. That's why we spend the most money. I mean, this right here, this fact right here. Okay, and I'm saying that whole food, plant-based diets provide all the protein we need. All we need. Now, by the way, we can increase protein intake on plants alone all the way up to 15 to 20%, to be honest about it. It has no effect. Because remember, plant proteins do not increase blood cholesterol. Plant proteins did not increase the cancers, as you saw from the data that we had. It's only the animal protein. So plant protein, we get up to that level here with more or less with some plants, and all plants, even potatoes, almost have enough protein too. So in any case, we consume all the animal food, jack it up higher and higher. And it's said to be, we can go all the way up there, no problem, but we get disease. That's it, in a nutshell. So the upper safe level, as I said before, that was established is 35% protein. I call it this is the number of the mod power. That's the body I just told you about before. That set that number without justification, just in a news release, set that number really high. It's now become rather official in this country. So I just want to bring in, there's a whole lot more I could talk about, easy another 10, 15, 20 lectures, just on the matter of policy. How does science get translated? It doesn't get translated very well. One more thing I want to show you, running out of time here, I'm getting close to it. This is something that started out in the late 1950s and on into the 1960s. There was an interest at that time in blaming cancer and so forth, especially cancer, blaming cancer on environmental chemicals. Pesticides and herbicides and smoke and this and that. It sounded like an okay idea because some of those chemicals were found to actually be able to cause cancer in laboratory animal studies. And here I'm just going to, and so that when that came up, then there was a lot of interest in testing all these chemicals out there in the environment to see which ones might cause cancer, which ones don't. That led to a big discussion, and it's still with us, that environmental chemicals are the chief cause of cancer. To make it long and short of it, it does not. These chemicals, yes, they are bad. We should do everything we can to keep them down, but it's not because of their cancer causing potential. It's nutrition that causes cancer, not these chemicals. Anyhow, here's the way this study really works. And a little bit complex here, but let me see what we can do with it. These are animal studies. This is done, it's very official. It's a bioassay program of the US government determining which chemicals cause cancer, which don't. And so what they do, they set up the study, and then they give the animals, these are rats and mice, by the way, they give them a dose of a chemical that's up very, very high. I'm throwing in some numbers here. And they determine whether or not they cause cancer. Well, occasionally you find a cancer chemical that does. It's a mutagen, usually it causes a mutation. And that kind of increases the opportunity for cancer. So let's say, for example, they usually have about three groups, maybe 4 groups of animals. If they found a study where there's a so-called dose-response relationship, high dose, next down, and you see a straight line relationship, then the question is, some of these things are in nature. We can't do anything about it. So what happens is that we have to project in our imagination, where that line is going to. Does it go all the way down to here, or does it come off, and does the body tolerate some there? And it turns out the reason we want to know what these data mean for here is because here's where we humans live. So it's being designed to determine what is the maximum amount of carcinogen that can be allowed, right? And we want to know, that we want to get it down to where the human risk is less than 1 death per million people. And so anyhow, this is where all the environmental chemicals operate. That is, those that cause this high cancer up in very high doses, if they can be worked down to here, then we call them carcinogens. And the popular story that's been told for so long, unfortunately, is that This is the whole deal. We just need to discover these chemical carcinogens. And they're all down here, like alar, herbicide used in, I think it was a herbicide used in apples. Another one, minotriazole was found for cranberries back in the 1950s, and on and on. Every once in a while you hear about a chemical that causes cancer. They're based on testing these things at very high levels and then extrapolating the data down to something that we might experience. Guess what? If we were to test casein in this system, and each of these numbers is an order of magnitude higher, casein would be at least 100,000 times more carcinogenic than any of those chemicals. Now, I want to stop here just for a minute. I said casein is far more carcinogenic than those chemicals. I do not, under any circumstance, mean to diminish the importance of these chemicals because they can cause nerve response, or they can cause some other things. So, as I said before, we've got to keep this under control. But casein, they don't want to test that. They won't test that because that would throw the whole operation into the ether. Actually, the whole idea. They don't want to test something like casein because it would actually completely discredit this whole process. And it would turn out that the real cause of cancer is consuming diets that have casein or other animal proteins. Look at, I mean, this, I wish I had more time. I wrote about this first in 1980. At the time I was involved in this work. And it's all been forgotten from then until now. They're still testing chemicals. They're trying to get people to don't listen to all that stuff about nutrition. Campbell doesn't know what he's talking about. There's really chemicals that we can't seem to avoid. I say that casein, if officially tested, we won't test it, would be the most powerful chemical carcinogen ever tested. I want to finish off here with just one more comment that's germane to our present day thinking. I have to admit that through the years, I've been deeply involved in policy development as well as in laboratory and lecturing and so forth and so on. I've seen some of the worst of the worst and how information unfolds, becomes it's called this or that or something else. So one of those names in the beginning, veganism, vegetarianism, or whatever. But there's one thing that just came up in the last 3 years that you all know about, has to do with the coronavirus. Let me show you something here. We did a big study in China. Many of you may know about all humans, obviously. We did it in 1983 and 84, and that was published in 1990. We were back again in 1989, that's 6 years later. And the second China study, few people have heard of this, was even bigger than the first one. It was a combination study with China and Taiwan. Interesting experience itself. But in any case, we surveyed 8,900 adults in China at that time for a very serious virus, hepatitis B virus. That virus is the most significant virus, I think, of all, because it kills around 800,000 people a year, somewhere between 600,000 and a million. I get different numbers, but a lot of people worldwide. It's the fifth leading cause of death in the world. Very serious virus. No one much talks about it at the present time. They got other things on their mind. So we looked at virus that caused a lot of liver cancer in China. We had ways of looking at all kinds of nutritional characteristics of these people, viral characteristics and so forth. I'm just going to show you a quick summary. This is for viruses in general, including on the coronavirus and many others. This is just a schematic. You know, we get infected by these viruses, okay? And we can't avoid that, except maybe minimizing your exposure to some extent. But we're going to get exposed to viruses all the time. They've been around here 1 million years before humans even came to the earth. So we're always in this environment where there's going to be viruses. They come, and I have a dotted line, they infect us, okay? When they come and infect us, they may remain active. This is what we call antigen. These are data that we actually did collect in China. The virus comes there, it remains active, it's alive, it's circulating in our blood. Now, it can go on at that point and eventually cause liver cancer death. That's where all these deaths come from. The virus is active, with a little bit of nutritional promotion, it caused liver cancer death. It turned out in the data we have, this is really quite amazing. It's the strongest data I've ever been associated with in my life. I only dug up these data and analyzed them at the beginning of the current pandemic. What our data showed, huge body of data, showed that people consuming even a small amount of animal food, only about 10% of what we do here in the West, this is largely in rural China, even a small consumption of animal food caused this virus active here in the blood to be associated with liver cancer death. In contrast, people consume more plant food. They did something different. The plant food people, they deactivated this virus by forming antibodies and T cells. You remember I was talking about the high animal protein actually decreases T cells? Well, animal food, it decreases. This is good stuff. Antibodies are good. It's from the immune system. So plant food supports the inactivation of the virus, right? Through the formation of antibodies and T cells. In contrast, those consuming just even a small amount of animal food, I did not expect to see these data. I could not believe it when it was true. That we had 11 different correlations, all pointing the same things, all highly statistically significant, I should tell you, for those of you familiar with that concept. So consuming a little animal food actually triggered this active virus to do its business. It wasn't inactivated to cause liver cancer death. As I said, 11 risk factor correlation, all converge the same outcome, all highly statistically significant. I mean, very powerful data. The animal food clearly had a major effect on this. Quite frankly, I submitted this for publication at the beginning of the virus, beginning pandemic, suggesting that this was the time when we should start talking about people eating the right food. Not just relying on the vaccines, just start to eat the right food, which is, I'm saying, basically is all plant-based, whole food, plant-based. So that's what our data showed. I wanted to then publish this. I sent it into two of them, like 1, 2 in the world and the Western world. And the custom is in science, when we send in a manuscript, it automatically gets reviewed. It's never turned down. It gets reviewed. At that point is when the judgment is made whether or not to publish it. And there are professionals looking at it. So the authors and the ones reviewing it have a back and forth to say whether or not it gets published. In this case here, those two journals would not even review our results, because I suggested that this information here had enormous implications for how to handle the pandemic. If we just ate plant-based foods, then the kind of diet that reverses cancer, as shown by Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, and others, the kind of diet that reverses cancer, as we were showing in the experimental data, that the human study has not been done on that well enough yet. But in any case, the animal food diet, reverses, controls those other diseases. It turns out it controls viral diseases too. They wouldn't even publish it. That's the first time in my life I've ever had that experience, and really it's very suggestive that somebody's there sitting, in control of the switch and decided we don't even want this to get out. So this story has not been told. I eventually published it in the journal from the European Commission at that time in Europe. It did get published eventually, but one was much less publicity than it would have gotten these other major journals. One more scheme here. Now, on the COVID-19, by the way, those who have poor nutrition, not eating plant-based foods, they're the ones that get diseases like obesity and diabetes and heart disease, cancer, and so forth and so on. They have what is called comorbidity, which increases their risk for suffering the severity of the the coronavirus. So this is a little scheme here. That if all these people who are getting the COVID diet and dying of COVID, if they were to be eating this kind of diet here, right, they wouldn't have the heart disease, cancer, stuff like that, and raise the risk for getting the coronavirus problem. And also, people consuming the whole food plant-based diet, I just showed you the data. If the if these people for coronavirus behave the same way as for hepatitis virus, I believe that's true. So the whole food effect stops. The comorbid condition that leads to COVID disease, and it also stops the formation of the severity of the disease and the end result. So after I published that, after it was turned down at first, and there were a couple more smaller studies, very limited, just phone call kinds of studies for the most part. People asked them what you eat and whether or not they had problems. And it turns out there was a study done in, first off, after that, and it's Kim and I showed that just asking that simple question, those people who consume a plant-based diet, as they call it, more vegetarian, vegan, or pescatarian, kind of a loose description, they had a 73% lower risk for coronavirus disease, serious consequent death. So that's why they said, they want to hear my stuff. I published that, submitted it for publication before these came out. They just only affirmed this one and this. That's the same thing was true. There's eventually what was published. I just decided to show it here. It's real, but it's those who are in power of this are controlling the information on the entire coronavirus COVID problem. They didn't want to hear anything about this. They had other ideas in mind. So I'm going to stop here. I'm really enthusiastic, as you can probably tell, that if we're going to control the environmental problems, all the environmental problems, quite frankly, if we're going to control healthcare costs, if we're going to make people healthier, and I'm convinced we can actually prevent at least 80% of heart disease, cancer, and premature deaths from those diseases. If we're going to do that, we've got to start talking about the role of nutrition, whole nutrition, multiple nutrients, multiple mechanisms, multiple diseases. That's a big summary there. This is worth a whole course on this. I call it the whole food plant-based diet. I'm the one that came up with the word plant-based back in the late 1970s when I was on a cancer committee deciding who gets grants and who doesn't. These were all oncologists mostly, and I was the only nutritionist. They wanted me to explain to them, what does nutrition have to do with cancer, and not much in those days. And I didn't want to use the word vegan or vegetarian, to be honest about it, because I think the conversation that surrounded that is not very scientific, very misleading. And so I used the word plant-based. I didn't know when that was ever going to catch on to it, but finally after 30 years or so, and now it's become pretty widespread. I wanted to use the word whole too, because of a whole another 5 or 10 lectures. I don't have the time to get into it here. Why talk about whole food instead of single nutrients? So put the two together. Simple message. Just try to consume whole food, make sure it's plants. End of story. I mean, the solution to the problem is so darn simple. It just is never explained. It's never explained to the point where people can really benefit from it. Published that in 2005, that study there. When I did that, thanks to my wife, who told me to stop complaining about the things I was saying, and just publish a book for the public. And so I said, okay, I'll try to do that. I did it with my son, who's now a physician himself, involved in this work. So we published this. I didn't think it was going to go. What turned out has been translated to 50 foreign languages. Now it's about 4 million copies. It's an old slide. It's really just been incredible the way it's gotten out there. I then published another one in 2013 called Whole. This one here is the one telling you why food should be in the whole food form, not as supplements. It doesn't do anything. That's not what it does. It's the whole plants and the whole food that needs to be done. There's a New York Times bestseller. And then most recently, actually, was my grandson, Nelson Dishler. He's a brilliant writer. We put out this book here in 2020. What is that? Just 2 years ago. It hasn't done as well, but it had no publicity for it. I'm talking in there about the kind of mistakes that we've made in the past that have misled people to cause all the confusion. So those books, if you're interested, take a look at them. I think a lot of you have. Here's an online course, by the way, that we've had now. It's at Cornell. And it's a course that's really done quite well. We have about 20,000 graduates. And as I say, it's done really well. We've just about finished now making a Spanish version of the whole online course for those who may have taken it. The Spanish version is going to be released very soon, I think this summer. And they're all Spanish lecturers. And there's about 500 million Spanish-speaking people in the world. So we're really looking forward to the opportunity of sharing this information with the Spanish community. And we're thinking also now about a couple other communities, Italian and Chinese as well. So we've got a lot of work to do on this thing, but I'm really excited about it. We've got one more thing. My daughter she has her doctorate in nutrition education. She's now the president of this organization. And they're introducing a new program called Food Sustainability in the Dominican Republic, where we'll be able to the plan is to bring down groups of students to do some study on the whole question concerning what kind of food should we be raising, and how does that work in every system. So again, I've gone along too far, too long. I know that, but whatever you can grasp from my comments, I hope you can. There's far more to this story, and as I said, with our online course, we really want to get into offering this offer it in a language, in a way as much as possible that's usable by the public, but at the same time, it's a course that's based on solid science. I'm very anxious about that in a way. Too much stuff is being discussed, but all these different kinds of diets is only causing confusion, and none of those people really are in nutrition. They're just sort of throwing stuff out, throwing something up against the wall and hope it sticks. That's about the way I look at it. I've become pretty cynical about that stuff. We've got to learn what the role of nutrition is, and there we can find something that's really an extraordinary bit of information. So thank you. I didn't mean to go with that last one. I was saving it in case I had more time to talk, but this is enough, an hour and 10 minutes, so we'll take it from there. Thank you.
That was great, Dr. Campbell.
Well, this is the problem with this area, Elaine. It's a huge scientific subject. It's being overlooked and it's being simplified so much that it doesn't sell. It doesn't sell very well. But
well, there's definitely questions. So
definitely what?
Take questions. Definitely have questions for you. I've been taking notes as we've been live. So it was pretty early on, but one question said high animal protein only is what you were referring to, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And my question actually I wrote down was, do athletes need more protein?
What? Do
athletes need more protein?
Do I eat more protein?
Do athletes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they have. I mean, that's been out there, and they have gotten onto it. But really, there's also other athletes, really world-class athletes, I've gotten to know personally, who have chosen to eat plant-based. And they see amazing improvements in their performance. It's that simple. Tony Gonzalez, the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs for most of his career, then on the Atlanta Falcons, he's now a sports broadcaster. He called me up one day. He got the book. He tried it. He's an all-pro, the top athlete in his position, and he all of a sudden realized he was feeling better, performing better. That was in his 11th year already, a long time. He went and played another 6 years after that. And then Scott Jurek, who runs 150-mile marathons, he turned to this too. Brazier in Canada, champion journalist, ice hockey, Jaromir Jagr, probably the top ice hockey guy ever. John Sally, all-pro basketball player. Yeah, I'm just telling you some names of people in the sports world who have actually gone plant-based. and they see big improvements.
Oh, for sure. How much protein are they eating on a
Well,
daily
they're
basis?
eating too much. I mean, they really got into it because everybody, they all thought, more protein, they get, it does, it tends to build more muscle. But take a look at the death rates of those people who have put on all that extra weight. They're dying kind of young
No.
for a variety of diseases, when actually they could do better, especially in coordination, and swiftness, and running fast. And the coordination is a big thing in athletics, as you know. And so, that's what they do.
Yeah, I remember Robert Cheek took your course, and
Yes.
he said he used to literally fall asleep with like a vegan hot dog hanging out of his mouth so he can get enough protein in his diet. Then he took your course and he stopped, and he still has the muscle mass
That's
that
right.
he had previously, eating all that proteins, because it's the bodybuilders and the powerlifters in the vegan world that say you have to eat all that protein.
Right.
That causes some conflict, I think, for like the everyday people.
That's right. Absolutely. It's not really necessary.
Let me say, and instead of percentages, can you say how many grams of protein people need per day?
Well, I don't talk about it that way because it's kind of misleading to
Okay.
assume that, because the amount of grams that we consume depends on our body size. So you always kind of have to, adjust the number, whatever happens to be, to the body size that one has. Conventionally, there is a standard size for men. It's 70 kilograms, which is about 154 pounds, I think it is. There's the recommendation is they should be getting 80 grams a day for 154 male, 60 grams a day for a female woman. So those numbers are there, but they're not just sacred numbers. They're only just the average numbers that depend on the size of the person. But what is constant is the percent. In other words, if we say 5% of total calories, or 10% is enough total calories, that applies to everyone, male, female, old, young, whatever.
And much better, because that each individual can figure that out. And one
Yeah,
person in
percent
my
of
life
calories,
actually did the math, and basically
Yeah.
said 2,000 calorie diet times 10% of calories for protein equals 200 calories of protein, 4 calories per gram, which would equal 50 grams of protein needed per day for like a 2,000 calorie diet.
Right,
But you want to
right.
go more so for your body weight and your percentages of your body weight for how much protein you should eat.
Percentage of total calories eaten.
Okay, percentage of total calories is right. Okay, good. So Daniel did the right math. That's awesome. And then another question just came in, is from Nick. What are your thoughts on the meat alternatives that have become popular?
Not too happy with them. They are stepping in the right direction, and in a sense that it obviously helps the animals. We don't have to kill so many animals. That's very clear. But in terms of the message for health, unfortunately, the plant-based, well, I should say, the foods that are made up of, let's say, plant proteins, whole plant proteins, that's a step in the right direction. Not bad at all. Unfortunately, we have to rely on soy, 95% of which is GMO. So there's an issue there. But all of us do that, I guess. Anyhow. On the other hand, there is another group of people in the community who are trying to grow protein in a big vat, the cell-based protein. And the way they're doing that, and I have problems with that. The way they're doing that, of course, you don't consume animals by doing that. That's a step in the right direction. But the problem is they're synthesizing the protein from the so-called RNA of an animal. So, for example, you get chicken-like protein, for example, use an RNA from the chicken breast or something, or you get a pig, whatever. They use this RNA, put it in the vats. There's one problem there with respect to contamination that they have to worry about. But the other thing is, why would we want to make synthetic lamb or synthetic eggs or chicken? They're going to have the same effect as I just described here. It makes no sense.
That's so interesting that you say that, because it's exact thoughts that I've had, because a lot of there's a lot of promotion about the fact that you'll be able to eat your meat without, killing the animals, which I totally understand, because we don't want to kill the animals. We don't want to raise them for food, but you're still going to have the health issues. What I see with that meat is actually to feed it to our pets, to our dogs
right.
and our cats. It's to feed it to our pets, to dogs and cats.
Oh,
I see that as a great alternative to not having to slaughter other animals to feed our carnivorous cats that we have as house pets.
okay.
I see
Okay.
that as a positive for that type of meat. As for humans, I agree with you. You're going to have the same, thank you for saying that, because I guess the same diseases would be there.
Yeah, you're right. Your point about the cats and dogs, I like that. I hadn't heard it before. That's a good idea. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's how I look at it. To be able to feed my cat from that type of, from the pulling the food from that source, as opposed to the hardest part of having a cat is that I'm feeding him crap meat, because it's even crappier than what humans eat. So you're like, and when that comes out and they start making, hopefully it'll be extraordinarily expensive to start, I'm sure. But once it starts becoming more mainstream, then it'll be better. So another question, well, Walter said bioidentical, which is a good comment. And then Marina said, is raw vegan whole food plant-based diet a good idea?
No, I don't think so. It's kind of hard. A lot of people, I shouldn't say that. Some people do it really well and they stay with it and I like it. But I unfortunately have, in fact, experienced some people, couple of pretty prominent people who were big raw foodists, people talking that way, who died a bit earlier with stroke. I don't think, let's say it this way. We should, a good part of our diet, raw fruit, salads, fresh fruits, let's face it. That's really good. I mean, probably 70% of our diet, my wife and I, or 80%, something like that, is probably raw. But I don't want to prevent people from enjoying, let's say, cooked food if they want to do it that way. So not a big difference between the two.
That's a good point. Yeah, a lot of people go to raw, one, to lose weight, two, to feel like they're eating healthier, which you are, but you can, I mean, I know you're not saying to eat Beyond Burgers and Beyond Sausage and like all the processed foods. And this is what we talked about last time. And I wrote it in the comments on YouTube, was you are referring to a whole food plant-based diet with everything that you're saying, which is a very important thing for people to understand, is that you are eating whole foods. And that's what you're referring to when it comes to disease and the viruses and everything else. If you want your best chance of avoiding or mitigating from all these diseases and cancers and whatever else,
right,
whole food plant-based.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, after our last talk, it definitely had an impact. I mean, it's not like I don't know this. I mean, I've been in this for a while. But the talk we had last time really, it resonated even more than normal. And we've been eating a lot healthier since, I mean, it's the new year. We don't do resolutions, but we've been eating a lot healthier, and it matters. And getting exercise and doing all these things, it really makes a difference. And we feel better. I mean, it's great. I mean, having vegan cookies and cakes and everything, those taste delicious too. However, the outcome of eating that all the time is not healthy.
Yeah, by the way, there's another little story there I didn't mention, but I can. A lot of, there's a lot of, not a lot, but there's some people have tried to take a group of people and jumpstart with them. Put them on this kind of diet for, let's say, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. My oldest son has done that. My youngest son, a physician, has done that. The oldest son has done that a bit. He's the one that produced the film Plant Pure Nation. And he also is the one who now just finished another film. It's been submitted, by the way, to the film festival. The 3 film festivals now have put it in the top 5. one of them it has already decided to give it the Diamond Award. So going to be the winner. It's going to be announced sometime soon. And that what reason I tell you that is because the only like 10% of people stay with it after doing it for 10 days. Okay. And the question is, and after they see the benefits, still they only about 10% do it. My friends in Italy, who have been very serious working on this area, what they did, something really interesting. They took people for 9 days. It was easy to get people to do it for 9 days. Then at the end of the 9 days, what they said to them, would you like to do it another 15 days? And they're feeling pretty good at that time. And they say, yeah. They did that 3 more times. And after they got up to a total of about 68 days, I think it is, or 70 days, every single person has switched. And the reason that they changed for good, because their taste preferences had become readjusted. And they just didn't want to go back. So a lot of this story about making progress in this area on a large scale is to get the message out that, look, if you can stay with it really strictly for, let's say, at least a month, 2 months, something like that, that now you're up to 60 days, your taste preferences change and you don't want to go back. There's no going back. And I just think that's that was my Italian friends who did that. My oldest son, Aston Nelson, I don't know whether you know him or not, but he and his wife, Kim, he's a chef in this area. He's got a cookbook. And so very good. Yeah, that's right, 2 cookbooks.
Yep. That's awesome. And then Rangadavi said, I just want to make sure that I understand correctly. Animal protein refers to meat, eggs, and dairy.
Yes, definitely. Animal protein, eggs, dairy, meat. I mean, they all have this so-called high quality protein that raises serum cholesterol levels, that turns on cancer. They all do that.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions? Because this has been great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your family, and you know that already because we love you dearly. And thank you for saying that you wanted to do this with us. So I'm just waiting to see if anyone, because they have to type their questions. If anyone has anything else? Not, we will see you next time. We could do this like this right now it's like every couple of weeks, but we can do this every like twice a year. Catch up. Let us know the latest and greatest.
We're trying to build out a course. I mean, there's 10 or 20 times, well, it's more than that, material that could easily be talked about. It's very quite exciting. We're going to include that in the course as much as possible.
Awesome. And that's nutritionstudies.org. Oh, then Nick says, what are the top 2 to 3 whole food plant-based fruits or vegetables you would recommend?
Oh, I can't really pick out one over another. I mean, we have different preferences and tastes. And we haven't done enough work, really. I don't believe that eating one kind of fruit. I mean, I happen to like bananas. I like grapes. Yeah, what else? They're 2 big ones. Peaches, obviously. Berries. They're all good.
Right, just eat them is really what you're saying. Find the fruits and vegetables that you like to eat and eat them.
Right.
That's probably the best. That's probably the best thing. Here come the questions. And then Vic said, how many days was it to change your taste buds?
Oh, it varies. I mean, some people who are motivated at the beginning, they only need 5 or 10 days. They're there possibly. But then there's other people might have to go for 2 or 3 weeks before they really see enough that they, wow, I'm going to stay with this. I speak from personal experience too, because we had to change our diet. My wife was an outstanding cook, and she kept our family together, and maybe right to China study and all that. But her food, as she evolved over time, it was very tasty. And but I know for us, it took us like 10 years. It was all because I'm watching the data come in and becoming more and more convincing. Finally, she actually was diagnosed when she was pretty far along with melanoma, which is serious cancer. and third, advanced actually. And she was prescribed to take a chemo, and she was, it's not that long ago. And then by the time we get 100%, the whole way, and that was now 18 years ago. She did not do the surgery. She did not do any chemo. And the melanoma is gone. So.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yep, 18 years ago, yeah.
18 years ago. Yeah. And then Walter asked, this is going to be a good one. How can I reduce my cholesterol without reducing my oil intake? I just cannot give up oil.
Well, that's a problem. There's oil that we actually use for the most part is extracted from plants. That's why it's oil liquid. We don't usually use the lard and butter that are saturated. Oddly, however, the oil, the liquid oil, if you will, is worse than the solid stuff, because the liquid oil is made out of polyunsaturated fats, fatty acids. Polyunsaturated fats, when consumed alone like that, poured on food, not good. It's out of its context. The polyunsaturated fats work very well in the plant. You take them out and put them in bottles, it's an altogether different story. They actually produce these free radicals that stimulate cancer and heart disease. So we should really minimize, avoid it if one can do it, but really minimize added oil. Some people can do fine with a little bit on it, but that's an issue. I would suggest to that gentleman that he's really got to work on that. And again, that's the taste preferences that declines. If you just try so hard to get it down there.
Yeah, as you lessen, I mean, I think one of the things when people cook is they think, well, I need oil to saute like vegetables and onions to start the base of what you're cooking is you need the oil there. I mean, if you can start by getting the cooking sprays, like the pure olive oil organic cooking spray, and just spray the pan as opposed to a tablespoon of oil or more in there to start reducing. And you can use veggie stock to saute.
Yep.
And it works really well. And have water as your friend when you're sauteing. So use a little bit of the water to get it off the bottom as it sticks. And there's medium heat is your friend, not high heat. Some spices in there help with it. There's always Kim Campbell would be a great resource. So if you get some of those books, if you want to start cooking that way, it's
I don't particularly care for the advice no oil. When it's said very affirmatively. I've got some friends who tend to do that, but that's kind of a put down, makes it difficult. I say just minimize as much as possible. And the best results are basically no added oil. I'd rather be a little soft on that just for that reason.
Right, because it's hard. It's hard to go from using something, especially Walter saying it's like a big part of his diet, to cold turkey to not doing it whatsoever. And Walter says his main source of oil is mayo. And you can make a vegan mayo with less oil. You can use a silken tofu and some vinegar in there and garlic and seasonings, and it won't be 100% the same as what you're eating, but there are other options and you can get there. Use less of it instead of more of it.
Yep.
That's one way to cut back and still have it, because it's the taste. I get it. It tastes good.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and one positive comment. Thanks so much, Dr. Campbell and Helene, for taking time to do this. So great info that everyone needs to hear. So it's a great way to close this out. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us and for being you. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
No problem. Have a great rest of your day, Dr. Campbell.
Thank you.
All right, bye. Thank you everyone for joining us for this special episode of Virtual Vegfest Live. And we will see you on Wednesday for the vegan, no, not Wednesday, a week from Wednesday for the vegan stew at 7 p.m.